First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Seth Henderson from Summit Development. He brings 25 years experience of operations and project management for public agency, high-tech, healthcare, and multifamily residential projects. With experience as a general contractor, construction manager, owner's representative, operations manager, and developer. He is currently the acting president of Summit Development Group and partner at Level Development Northwest, working on market rate, mixed use, multifamily developments in Wilsonville, Gresham, and Oregon City. Seth currently serves on the board of the Downtown Oregon City Association, as well as the Oregon chapter of Construction Management Association of America. He lives in Southwest Portland with his family since 2009 and gives lots of presentations on Abernathy Green. Seth, please come up.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you very much for your time today. Thanks everybody for being here. Obviously, housing's a huge concern, so I'm glad there's such an engagement. I'll make this really quick. I wasn't planning on doing a long speech today, but we're doing about 20 presentations to neighborhood associations and professional organizations throughout Oregon City leading up to the ballot measure vote that's going to be in May on urban renewal. So I hope you are engaged if you live within Oregon City, either with professional organizations or your neighborhood association, and that you'll come and learn a little bit more about Abernathy Green and just ask questions. We've been working on the development for about 3 years. We have our general entitlements approved. It includes 500 to 600 multifamily units, which obviously ties directly into what we're talking to today. I'll be sitting at the table over there. Anybody that wants to ask questions about the project or have a discussion, I'll stick around afterwards. But thank you for the opportunity to sponsor today, and thank you to all our speakers that are here today. And please think about voting positively on the ballot measure in May and using current property taxes towards urban renewal and addressing the Cove, Rossman landfill, 12th and Main, Quiet Zone, the courthouse, and Stimson property. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. I'd also like to recognize Martha Schrader, who joined us. She's a county commissioner. You'll notice some blue cards on the table. If you have questions during the presentations, please jot them down and hold them up toward the end of the panel presentation. I'm sorry, Ben West is here as well. Thank you for coming. Anyway, please note your questions and someone will collect them and the panelists will have a chance to answer that at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like to invite Dan Fowler up. He is a developer in Oregon City, a former mayor, and a founding member of the Oregon City Business Alliance. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Renata. Okay, for the record, these are not my glasses. Okay, so if I get something wrong today, I'm going to blame Andy. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, please fill out these for questions later or as they come up as the speakers speak today. We've got a great group of speakers, and how this is going to work is I'm going to introduce each one right before they speak. First is Tootie, our chair, Tootie Smith of Clackamas County. They'll speak and then they'll come up to the desk or the raised area. So by the time they're all done speaking, they'll be there ready to go for our question and answer time. So I've had the privilege of, you can read this about Tootie, but I'm going to tell you a few other things that I think about Tootie Smith. She has become a very dear friend, actually. We've gotten to know each other quite well over the last few years. And Tootie was actually born and raised on a farm and near Clackamas County. Tootie is an author. She wrote a book about pay to play, sexual harassment, American style. Tootie also gets to speak because of her leadership and her authorship on behavioral morals in the workplace. She attended Mount Hood Community College and the University of Concordia, and she now lives out in Molalla with her husband on a hazelnut farm, her husband of 42 years. But also, I want to mention too about what I observe in Tootie is her common sense leadership. She is exactly the type of leader that I believe relates to Clackamas County. She's a fabulous listener. She has a saying, and I've picked it up from her, saying, we do things out here the Clackamas County way. And that's a lot about collaboration. It's a lot about working together. And she makes decisions. That's a sign of a good leader. And they're not always popular, but I know in her heart she's always doing the best she can for the citizens of our county. So without further ado, Tootie, please come up and share today.
Thank you. So I get a microphone and I get a clicker. That's probably dangerous, but we're going to get started on this. Clackamas County, the Board of Commissioners developed this Clackamas County Values on Housing and Shelter, and you can see that on our website. These are the values of which the Board of County Commissioners makes decisions. And hopefully we follow those all the time. And we are a human element. We try to strive for the best possible outcomes in everything we do. The new forthcoming goal that we just decided on, we had a board retreat about 3 weeks ago, and we do this every 2 years, especially if a new commissioner comes on. And one of our new goals is to reduce chronic and persistent homelessness in Clackamas County. And this means investing in strategies and policies that support affordable housing and traditional shelters and traditional housing, and all those have a separate definition. You may have heard about a little hotel over there at Sunnyside called the Quality Inn that Clackamas County Board of Commissioners just made a decision to purchase and use for traditional housing. It's called Project Turnkey. It's a 110-unit facility. We paid $15.2 million. All funds submitted to us through either the Oregon Legislature, the Metro Housing Bond, and the Metro Supported Housing Services, of which Clackamas County residents are paying taxes. And I said, if Clackamas County residents are paying taxes, then the projects stay in Clackamas County until the tax is expired. With that, we have wraparound services that will be provided, and that includes not limited to food, health, job assistance, search, mental health, substance abuse treatment, and other resources. What you may not know is that currently there are 12 residents in this Comfort Inn who are homeless, and they're in scattered sites throughout Clackamas County. And what came out of the legislature because of COVID was to erect a hotel model to put the homeless individuals in. And currently in Clackamas County, we have 90 of those people housed in a similar situation, but it's costing us 3 times the amount of money because we pay a daily rate, an average of $125. Buying this hotel reduces that by 3 to 4 times. It brings the cost down. We own the facility, which means we're responsible. People who come in are evaluated. They have to go through a process. And what's really top on Commissioner's mind is causation of homelessness and accountability. This just isn't a place for the homeless folks to come in and flop, and they are not expected to perform. And many people don't have their IDs. They've been living on the street, they lost their driver's license, they don't remember the Social Security number. Many of them qualify for assistance, Medicaid, Social Security. We have staff to help them on that. We have staff to help them get a job and go forward. And yes, there have been successes along this area. The nice thing about the Comfort Inn, it's 3 stories, but there's separate wings. So if there's a situation where there's women and children, they can go over to this wing and be somewhat isolated from a population that's men, single men only, or maybe it's men with families. They can integrate, but we will be putting out RFP for the service provider on that through a nonprofit who's very skilled in doing this. What was very heartening to commissioners, we toured the Rockwood Center that Multnomah County did a similar model to this. By the way, this has been done about 29 times throughout the state before Clackamas County came along to do this. At the Rockwood Center at 181st and Halsey in Portland, they have 20 different providers who help the homeless people in this situation. And I said, and I looked at the list and I saw it and I said, well, Rockwood School District, they're a provider? And they told me, well, yeah, the school bus comes and picks up the kids in the morning and takes them to school and then brings them back at night after school. And I gotta tell you, that hit my heart. Yes, that is very real, and yes, that's in Clackamas County. In the North Clackamas County School District, there are at least 240 children attending school who are homeless that come out of the tents and get picked up on the side of the street and go to school, and that is very real. And for me, if we do this only for the children, that's a success. That is just on that particular front. Yes, this will be done the Clackamas County way with accountability results. I go back to two words, causation, accountability. Why are you homeless? Let's find out, why are you homeless? There's many reasons why people are homeless. Some people say, they're just bums. They're just lazy. They don't want to work. It's drug addiction. It's this and this and this. It's everything. There is not one causation for homeless. It's many. And I am concerned about the increased inflationary pressures that we all feel, that the cost of housing and the cost of paying rent is becoming out of reach for many of the people, especially in Clackamas County. We have the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. And the nice little snippet I like to say about this is Clackamas County is the oldest county in Oregon by far, and the Clackamas County Housing Authority is the oldest housing authority in the state of Oregon, and everybody in this room wasn't even born yet when it became in existence. And if you think you're old, well, not really. The Housing Authority is much older than you are.
Judy, could you use the other microphone? That one might not be on.
Use this one? Use this one? Okay. Sorry about that. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Yes. I missed that one. Okay. One of our goals that was established several years ago, by 2025, the county will develop 1,500 affordable housing units. We'll probably reach that goal much sooner with the help of additional monies that have come into Clackamas County. The next slide, let me explain this to you. Just take a look at the top slide where it says total units going across. Well, within 10 years, and it's based on the Metro bond that was passed several years ago that Clackamas County residents voted in favor of, by the end of that, we should accomplish 3,900 units. Currently today, we have 511 units that have been complete. That's about 10%, but it's also a 10-year period of time that the money comes in. Under construction is 1,673 units, pre-construction 1,060 units, and then remaining 655 units. And I will read some of those facilities to you. Rosewood Station, complete, 214. Clayton Moore Commons, Oregon City. Hillside Manor, Oregon City. Webster Road, Gladstone. Fuller Station Apartments, Good Shepherd Village, Maple Apartments, Molalla Apartments, Merrillhurst Commons, Lake Grove in Lake Oswego, Hillside Park Redevelopment, and Hillside Park Redevelopment Phase 1 and 2 in Milwaukee. We got special approval from HUD, and our congressional delegation, Senator Merkley, came out and looked at the facility in Milwaukee. Those houses are World War II housing on scattered sites. It's taking up a lot of land. So we got permission from HUD to redevelop that, increase the amount of housing units there, and go forward on it, and we're very, very excited about that. Whoops. Okay, there we go. There we go. Lands are needed. Oregon City, Happy Valley, and Malala are experiencing and growing. In fact, they're in the top 5 fastest growing cities in the entire state. Clackamas County is home to 6 out of the 10 fastest growing cities in the entire state of Oregon, and we're running out of land. Metro approves a urban growth boundary exchange. We were in opposition to that. I don't look at it as an exchange. I look at it as a land taking. The city of Tigard wanted to develop 500 acres of housing, but because of our really crazy archaic land use laws, of which some of these folks on the panel will talk about, I hope, they took 500 acres out of urban reserves in Damascus, in Clackamas County, and gave it to Washington County. And I says, fine, make us whole. Give us 500 acres designated back or compensate us, of which Metro has done neither. We'll get around to Clackamas County in another 2 years. Just wait for us to make a decision. The Board of County Commissioners does not want to wait for a decision on this, and I suspect we'll be taking some action on that. It is land use in Clackamas County. Somehow we've been the experiment for the region. The grand bargain with Washington County many years ago gave a whole bunch of land for jobs development in Washington County, and we have not received that. So we are very busy at this Oregon legislature trying to get jobs lands designated in Clackamas County along with more housing opportunities, and we have the land. Clackamas County has 1.3 million acres of land, although the 3rd largest county by population, and that may be changing because we're growing. Last 11 years of the population in Clackamas County has grown, incrementally increasing, and people want to come to live here, and there's many reasons why that is so. I think that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist, Dan. Thank you very much.
Table and we'll go up at the end. So you can, yeah. Thank you very much, Tootie. I like the connections you've made between some of the crises we see in homelessness and the availability of affordable housing and land supply. I mean, you can't have, one is a cause and the other is the effect. I mean, it's real. It happens. Supply and demand is real when it comes to pricing. Okay, our next speaker, and I'm going to have him just return to the table, and we'll come up here when we get to the question and answer time. Preston Coast is the Director of Public Policy at Government Affairs with the Home Builders Association. Preston is the Government Affairs Director. He manages the organization's political and public policy work at the local level, advocating across 6 counties and over 40 jurisdictions on issues that affect housing, affordability, livability. Before the HBA, Preston was the Director of Governmental Affairs Relations for Habitat for Humanities here in Portland, where for 5 years he worked on various capacities to support the governmental funding, zoning reform, coalition building for affordable housing projects throughout the region. While at Habitat, he also led the government grants program that drew on millions of dollars for a variety of sources from federal, state, local levels. He began his career in the local political campaigns in Portland, and then for 2 members of the Oregon congressional delegation, while earning his bachelor's degree at Oregon State University and a master's degree from the University of Portland. So, Preston, welcome. We're anxious for you to come and solve all our problems and tell us in some practical terms, I hope, what we actually might do to meet the governor's goals.
We can do. Hello. Thank you, and I'm glad I was tasked with taking care of the entire region's housing solutions problem. So I got you covered. Let's get started. So just start us off, I should let everyone know that the Home Builders Association is now going by the Home Building Association of Greater Portland. A small change, but I think an important one that sort of encompasses the broader perspective of what building and builders sort of do for our region. We have members from the financing side to developers to builders, as well as, everyone in between. So we want to sort of more broadly encompass that. And that's a new change, so just FYI. Like you mentioned, we do cover 6 counties. I have 40 cities in my jurisdiction, and each one has their own set of housing policy and vision. Of course, that keeps me very busy, and my role here is not at the state level, just so everyone knows. I do work primarily at the local level, even though we do support and work and interact with our folks at OHBA. So my presentation is going to be largely focused on the regional, local housing policy trends, production targets, and things like that. But I'm happy to also discuss what's happening in the state legislature as well, if that comes up. So the challenge, I think this should be the shortest slide. We know that we have a housing supply crisis as well as an accompanying affordability problem. So that's what we know. I think everyone is sort of familiar with it and aware of it. We know that the impact that this has on all income levels, all housing types. Of course, I think we're all aware that stable, affordable home ownership and housing generally is good for the community and family and individual outcomes. So let's just take a look. The last 10 years. We've seen pretty much a doubling of the average home sale and home values here in the Portland region. So that encompasses, I think that's a tri-county trend right now. And as you can see, that's basically squeezing anyone who makes less than $140,000, $150,000 a year from being able to attain home ownership in a reasonable fashion. So for the most part, that is a very small, it's getting a smaller and smaller capture of our area's population and overall area median income. And the reasoning for that stark increase is, of course, for decades we've been undersupplying and underbuilding homes in our region. Currently, right now, we're staring at, just regionally speaking, we have about 60,000 units that we need to build yesterday. So that means we need to get ahead of that as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, at the local level, state level, and the federal level to make an impact. And over the next 20 years, just to keep track with our aging housing stock and our just general population growth and trends, and folks moving in here, not including, I think what some are calling climate change refugees. I think we're also looking at that, thinking, well, that might impact our population trends. We're going to need another 220,000 units. So overall, I think our region is going to need to produce anywhere from 15 to 20,000 units a year. And currently, we're nowhere close to that. And this, of course, everyone loves a 5x5 column of just pure data in a presentation, of course. But if you look at the trends, I think it starts to make a little bit more sense. So the past 4 or 5 years, the state of Oregon has been capturing basically housing production, permitting, and data within the cities and counties within the whole state, really. But I've consolidated all the data for just our specific region. And what you can see is that in the past 4 years or so, we've been building about 10,000 units per year, every year, pretty consistently, but it is trending down, which means that for a variety of reasons, we are not producing as many units as we have in the past, 4 years even. And you can see the share there. So if you look at the bottom 2 columns, you can see the share of multifamily apartment units takes up about 2/3 of our overall production right now. So about 1/3, but that is trending down, and that's a national trend. I think the apartments movement, construction movement, is sort of reaching an oversupply, and that's why we're seeing rental units potentially leveling out or even dropping. We're seeing a trend up in single detached units. So that's sort of a switch and shift in sort of the type of units that we're seeing. And then the overall affordable side, of course, the affordable sector I come from, the affordable housing world, tends to get the majority and the lion's share of politicians' attention and time and focus, even though it does represent just about 8% of the overall total development of housing within our region. Now, as Chair Smith mentioned, with the affordable housing bonds happening in Portland and in Metro, we may see that inch up, to 12, 15% potentially even, but for the most part, the lion's share of development is occurring on the market rate side. So the challenges, of course, this is where I can sort of lecture all the elected officials from time to time. There's no shortage of challenges right now, and this is the first of 2 slides, just FYI. We do take a look. I'm not going to go through any of them, and of course, the the individual challenges that occur in one city or one region does not necessarily mean it happens in another. So tree removal fees and regulations are far more strict in areas like Portland and Lake Oswego than they are in Washington County or Hillsborough or Gresham. So basically, it is a regional problem, and I am talking regionally. But these are just a few, to name a few at least. And then the second page, there's no shortage, like I said. This one, I think we do have a couple sort of global trends. So labor shortages is pretty impactful to builders, especially in the past year plus. Increasing interest rates obviously is going to have an impact on development. That's global. That's sort of out of our control at the moment. As well as, just general taxes, which that is a local trend. You'll note that the Oregon OBI recently released a report that said the city of Portland is the #1 highest tax rate in the city or in the country, second only to New York, but their effective tax rates kick in at like 25 million. So basically, Portland is the highest tax city in the nation at the moment. And that does have all of these, if we think of housing as an ecosystem, all of these have the impact to change the environment and change the production that is possible within a specific region for housing. So that's the problem. I think here are some solutions that we're focused on, which is good. So we are, some recent trends we have been seeing, House Bill 2001 has recently allowed duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and other types of units and ADUs to be built in more places, and that's good. We're seeing that starting to come about. I think in the city of Portland specifically, we've seen 500 or so units since last year, at least permitted, which is good. So we're starting to see more of those types of units being built. I think that is a good trend. I do see permitting is probably the biggest issue that our members face at the moment, both in terms of the process of how archaic and slow and sort of bogged down it is, as well as the timeframes that it's taking permitting officials and permitting entities to actually get through a simple, even normal buildings that housing units that have been approved dozens of times before. Just the process has been weighted down, and of course they're facing staffing shortages as well. So that's #1 on our list right now, probably. And then there's also, our local vision to increase workforce housing. That is folks between 80% and 120% of area median income. We can, talk about SDC reforms, fee waivers, some sort of tax exemptions that are working right now. So there's a few cities that have reformed the time in which SDCs are actually charged. Some cities are doing this better than others, but basically, if you charge the builder their system development charge fees at the time of the certificate of occupancy or final inspections, it means that they don't have to spend 6, 9, 12 months of carrying costs paying for those, what can be, $30,000 to $50,000 per unit. So overall, that's one of our leading policy priorities for the year, is trying to get governments to right time their SDC charges. And I think that's something that we're going to try to be pushing for at all local jurisdictions. But if Oregon City officials are here, that's something that one thing you can do that doesn't cost you anything, but it does help builders engender some form of affordability in their units. And of course, as Sheriff Smith mentioned, land supply is becoming more and more of an issue, especially as builders are starting to build out in Hillsborough, King City, Wilsonville, Tigard, Beaverton's also on the list. We're seeing land prices continue to skyrocket, and it's getting a larger and larger share of development. So per unit, it's becoming an issue. And in the future, we don't have any other jurisdictions really that we're seeing that are leaning in and willing to concept plan and get ready for future development. Sherwood's one. Areas in the Stafford, cities within the Stafford region is another that we're hoping will take that step forward. But at the moment, we're not seeing any other jurisdictions really take lead on that. So conclusions, there is no silver bullet. We're here, as you saw the challenges list that we're facing. It's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, and we're going to need 1,000 solutions to get us back on track and to create the type of units and the ecosystem of housing that we need. Of course, we prefer partnership over litigation. I think that is, hopefully that's not a new or surprising trend. We always work better when we're in sync with our governmental partners rather than just suing them, which generally speaking is good public policy. And then of course, the one thing that I would suggest all cities and governments, cities, counties, governments in the housing sphere to do is to try to create as consistent and a predictable building environment and processing and approval process as possible. You can have the worst building codes and the most anti-development sentiments within your community, but if you make it predictable and consistent in terms of how building housing applications are permitted, then you'll at least get a better start. So that's it. I will feel free to write down my email, give me a shout. I'm happy to always talk housing. And I will pass it over to the next presenter.
Excellent. Good job. Thank you, Preston. If you got questions that are popping up in your mind, that's what these cards are about. And there's pens on the table. Just write them down. We'll have some people circulate in a minute because we'll be getting to our question and answer time. So our next speaker is Dave Honeycutt. And Dave is the president of the Oregon Property Owners Association. And as president of the OPOA, they are active in the legislature and in the courts to protect Oregon property owners from excessive state and federal regulations. For over 25 years, Dave has represented Oregon property owners in the Capitol and in the courts throughout Oregon. As a registered Oregon lobbyist, Dave has successfully advocated for passage of legislation to protect Oregon property owners in all areas of real estate law. He's also an active member of the Oregon State Bar and has represented Oregon property owners in litigation in the courts and agencies throughout Oregon. He's appeared and argued before the Oregon Supreme Court, the Oregon Court of Appeals, Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals, and multi-Oregon agencies. Dave received a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Oregon and his doctorate from the Northwestern School of Law at Lewis and Clark College. Dave, come on up and give us your perspective on laws and land use.
Thank you. I apologize up front. I'm going to put this in here. I apologize up front for my attire. My wife and I have been married 34 years. She thinks I'm a hillbilly because I grew up in Columbia County, while she grew up in the cosmopolitan city of Cannon Beach. And so when you've been married for 34 years, you usually feel, you get comfortable just speaking your mind. And so I asked her, I was heading out the door about 6 a.m. this morning. I had to get to the Marble Nut House in Salem for an 8 o'clock hearing. And so I asked her how I looked, and she said, "You look like a dork." Well, so anyway, if you agree with my wife, I apologize for that. Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in Salem, because I spend the bulk of my time lurking in the halls of the Capitol when the legislature's in session. We're in a long session right now, and the odd-numbered years we go into the long sessions, which start about the middle of January and run till usually through the end of June. And then in the even-numbered years, we have short session, which starts at the 1st of February and runs through the first week of March. So we're in long session now. This is the time, this is the session where the legislature tries to do some of the bigger policy items. And as the governor and Christine Drazen and Betsy Johnson all made clear in their gubernatorial runs, housing is a big deal right now in this state. We are truly in a housing crisis. That term gets overused quite frequently, but we are in a housing crisis right now. Preston gave you the regional numbers. Just on the statewide numbers, we're about 110,000 units behind on a statewide basis. And according to the state's economist, we need 550,000 additional units to meet the supply for the next 20 years. as we have, and my organization represents all property owners, from farmers and ranchers to home builders to developers. I share members with Preston. And I also represent property owners that actually do the development work themselves. A lot of property owners, if they're more sophisticated, will do the development work themselves, get the entitlements, run through the local land use planning gauntlet, and then turn around and sell lots to the actual builder. So I have those folks as well. We have been telling Governor Kotek, since she was Representative Kotek, even before she became Speaker Kotek, that there is no amount of state money that can be put into this issue to solve the problem. In order to solve this problem, you're going to have to rely on private sector in order to get this housing problem solved, and it really for us is less of a philosophical issue than it is a math problem, and so. What we hear, or what I hear repeatedly from the folks that are in this industry, and from my landowner folks that are sophisticated enough to do their own development, when we ask what the problems are, we get two answers. Number one, we need land supply. We have shorted ourselves land supply, and I deliver every year to the legislature, to the housing and land use committees in both chambers every year, a graph, and I didn't have time to do a PowerPoint today, so I apologize, or I'd show it to you. We have a pie chart. We basically in this state we have a little over 1% of the state's total land mass is inside urban growth boundaries. And so under our statewide land use planning goals, we have 19 statewide land use planning goals in this state that were a part of Senate Bill 100 that created our land use system. Out of our process that we've created as a result of those statewide land use planning goals, we essentially direct just about all people to move into a little over 1% of the state's total land mass, which creates a land supply issue. When we have an urban growth boundary, which we do, Goal 14 led to the creation of the urban growth boundary. When we have urban growth boundaries and we manage those either by metro for the Portland metropolitan region or by cities as we go to the cities outside of Portland metro, if we don't have enough land supply, then what we end up with is high dirt costs, which some of my members like a lot, but if I've taken pictures and shown them to the legislature of the urban growth boundary, aerial photos, and it's obvious if you get up in a helicopter and you fly around, the urban growth boundary is pretty obvious, at least in parts of the Portland metro area. You can clearly see where the urban growth boundary is because you'll have a subdivision on one side of a road, a fairly dense subdivision on one side of the road, and basically nothing on the other side of the road. And when I tell folks that what we're paying, for example, in Beaverton for available dirt that's inside the urban growth boundary is about $800,000 an acre, and right across the street, we get that, we can buy that same land that's outside of the urban growth boundary. It's the exact same land, same soil type, same topography, it's the exact same land, but that sells for about $15,000 an acre. Then you get a pretty good idea of the impact of the boundary and the fact that we've essentially shorted our supply of available land to the point where the housing prices are where the dirt costs are essentially make it impossible when you also add in the systems development charges that Preston talked about. A lot of cities in the Portland metro area, the SDCs are roughly, when you throw in all of them, are roughly $50,000 a unit. Well, if we're paying $800,000 an acre for the dirt and $50,000 a unit for SDCs, we're not going to build you affordable housing, and it's not because there's not a need or desire to produce that product. It's simply a math problem. And so land supply is one of the primary complaints that I hear. The other complaint I hear is process. Okay, we have goal one, and goal one is LCDC's goal one is citizen involvement. And so we take citizen involvement very seriously in this state. But at some point, citizen involvement turns into overkill, and I'll explain that a little bit to you. I'll give you an example that probably illustrates this. I had a client in Forest Grove who owned a lot with a house in an old 1920s subdivision. Well, in 1920, quarter-acre lots were density. That was infill. It's not that way anymore, but it was then. The city of Forest Grove had rezoned that area for infill, and so we were basically taking a quarter-acre lot and attempting to partition it to create 3 separate parcels, each with a house. Well, needless to say, the neighbors didn't like that very much. And so we're at a public hearing in front of the Forest Grove Planning Commission, and it's me and my client sitting up there, and about 40 people behind us who had formed the Friends of We Hate This Guy and We Hate Our Neighbor, sitting behind us, staring right at the Planning Commission, and every time that I would say something, they would boo. And one of the neighbors was a pharmacist. He came in with scrubs on. Do pharmacists wear scrubs? I don't know, but he came in with his scrubs, and he brought his kid in his Boy Scout uniform. And anyway, it was the full gamut of what we were doing was awful, even though it was in compliance with the code. We got done with our hearing. It took about 4 hours, about half an hour of presentation from us and 3.5 hours of these people are pure evil from the neighbors. And the planning commission one of the planning commissioners said to the city attorney, if Mr. Honeycutt has satisfied all of our criteria for approval, but I don't like it, do I have to vote yes? And the city attorney said yes, and so we got our approval. But the point is, process, it really kills production. Time is money. If the process is uncertain, the local government's well-intended, but the process is uncertain, and it takes 3 or 4 years, and I have to do 6 different applications looked at by 6 different staff with 6 different timelines, all of which could potentially be appealed to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, the Court of Appeals, and the Oregon Supreme Court, and then come back down. It's not going to make me real interested in taking $4 million of capital and buying 5 acres at $800,000 an acre. And so land supply and process is what we've continually repeated to the legislature. Listen to us. We're telling you what the problems are and help us. To that end, just this morning, the House Housing Committee passed, and this is just the first step in a long process, but the House Housing Committee passed this year's version. The version of House Bill 2001 that Preston was talking about was the 2019 version. The 2023 legislature passed this year, our House Housing Committee passed this year's version of House Bill 2001 in 133 pages of easy reading. And so essentially what this year's version of House Bill 2001 does is it puts some teeth into Goal 10. Goal 10 is our state's housing goal. For all intents and purposes, what Goal 10 has meant from 1975 till today has been a whole lot of nothing. There hasn't been any teeth put in it. The agency hasn't cared much about it. LCDC hasn't cared much about it. But now that we're in the midst of a housing crisis, they're starting to care. So this bill puts some teeth into Goal 10, and it essentially does that by giving the state a significantly heightened oversight role over local governments. And so under this bill, the state, not the cities, the state will be creating housing production targets for the cities, both within the metro region and outside of the metro region. And the cities, in turn, will have to develop housing production strategies and demonstrate that they're complying with those housing production targets. And if a city falls behind and isn't meeting its housing production targets, then the state will have the ability to come in and essentially, with a variety of different tools, do what it needs to do to get that city up, to get those numbers up and get them closer to meeting their housing targets. And that could be something from as small as providing some money to the local government for infrastructure improvements. Maybe the city wants to grow, but it can't because it needs, it needs upgrades to its sewage treatment plant or something like that. So it could be as small as infrastructure, some type of infrastructure grant, or it could be as significant as, okay, we're going to take over your zoning code. We're going to allow property owners in your community to come in, and we're going to use our zoning code, our model code, and the property owners can choose, the applicants can choose whether or not they want to satisfy our model code or your model code, which in most instances, 99% we'll take the state's model code. And so it really has a wide variety of teeth that it puts into the state and changes the balance between the state and local government on housing inside the urban growth boundary, residential development inside the urban growth boundary. That bill, I believe, will pass. It has unintended consequences that we're working to fix, but I suspect that bill will pass. The problem with that bill is it will really only have an impact in about 2029 at the earliest. By then, we'll be at least another 100,000 units further in the hole. We're building about, statewide, about somewhere between 19 and 20,000 units a year. The governor says we need to build 36,000 units a year. In order to do that, we need immediate help, not a bill that's good, but won't take effect until 2029 at the earliest. We need immediate help to do that. And so what we're looking for and what we're trying to do at the Capitol is really for what we refer to as short-term solutions, and there's really 4 of them. The first is to fix the process. As I illustrated, or as I said, we need change now, and we need change to the process now. It needs to be easier to build houses in residentially zoned properties. That's what areas. That's what a residential zone is for. It's to build residences. It shouldn't require us to do 3 backflips and eat a bug in order to build housing in a residential zone area. We need to fix our land supply issues. We need to make it easier to expand the boundary. A UGB amendment process shouldn't take 8 years. It should take, a year from the time that Metro passes gets the boundary, issues the order to expand the boundary. So we need to fix our land supply issues, make it easier for jurisdictions to expand their land supply. We need to especially help our small cities. This isn't an issue for the Portland metropolitan region, but there are so many small cities in Oregon and rural Oregon that have no possible chance to be able to develop and grow because they don't have the money or the staff to be able to understand how to navigate through our complicated land use process, and bills like this don't help. And so we need to figure out ways to make it easier for our small rural cities to expand. I'll give you one example, and then I've got one more what we need to do, and then I'll shut up. The coastal areas in this state have significant development restrictions, and they're not necessarily locally done. But imagine that I got a call from the manager at the Fred Meyer in Brookings the other day. You guys know where Brookings is. It's clear down in Curry County, the south part of the coast. Brookings basically doesn't have enough housing to meet the needs of their employers, and so they're having a terrible time trying to find housing for the people to work at the various jobs in Brookings, and so they need help. But here's the problem for them. If we do infill, we increase density, we're infilling right into a tsunami zone. And we all know that at some point in the relatively near future, I hope it's after I'm gone, but at some point we're going to have a significant earthquake. And so increasing density and putting more people into a tsunami zone might not be such a great idea. On the other hand, in order to expand their boundary, they're going to go east. And as you go east out of most coastal cities, it starts to get real steep real fast, and you get into forest zones. And the state has made it almost impossible to expand your urban growth boundary into farm and forest zones. So what are they supposed to do? We need to figure out ways to help cities with that conundrum, whether it's a coastal community, an Eastern Oregon town that wants to grow but can't, that are surrounded by farmland, or what have you. The last thing that we're urging that the legislature do is that they don't go backwards. Okay, whatever you do, don't pass any further legislation this year that actually makes it harder for us. You need to make it easier for us. And unfortunately, there are some bills that might get some traction, at least early on in the session, that will make the process go backwards. So we are definitely going to be keeping an eye on those. So I think something good is going to happen this session. I can't guarantee that something good is going to happen this session, but we're all down there fighting and trying to make it happen. And for once, I think we have a governor that really, and it would have been the same, frankly, whether it was Christine Drazan or Betsy Johnson. We have a governor that really cares about housing and wants to help make the process better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, one more speaker, and then we're going to have some Q&A. So Andy Shaw is the Director of Governmental Affairs at Metro, and Andy, in that, is the current interim Director of the Planning, Development, and Research for Metro. Metro, we know, is our regional government. Prior to his current role, Andy was the Chief of Staff for then Metro Council President Tom Hughes. Before joining Metro, Andy worked in government affairs at the Oregon League of Cities, focusing on transportation and municipal finance. Andy has a master's degree in public policy and administration from California State University in Sacramento, and has worked in the California State Legislature for 10 years before moving to Oregon in 2005. Andy, welcome.
Well, thanks for having us on this panel today. You may know Metro because we run the Oregon Zoo or the Oregon Convention Center. Chair Smith mentioned the affordable housing bond, the supportive housing services measure that we are managing, getting the resources out to our counties, working with them as fast as we can to tackle those challenges. We also get rid of the region's waste. We remove the solid waste from our area out to the appropriate places, recycling, and deal with collection of hazardous waste. So interesting cross-city, cross-county suite of responsibilities that we have. And we're also charged under state law with managing state land use, and under federal law with managing transportation planning. We are in the midst right now of our update to the regional transportation plan, a 25-year look out in the future. And we're just launching this year a 2-year process to update the urban growth management process, which leads to potentially a decision around urban growth boundary choices in 2024. So we'll look forward to hopefully coming back out and talking about that process in the near future. Okay, so I mean, we all, you found out I'm really from California, so we all moved here or grew up here, loving this place, loving the natural beauty, and we are also challenged with a housing crisis, like most of the West Coast, most of the country right now, also challenged with a severe housing crisis and challenged with homelessness. But so as we plan for the future, we try to balance those existing crises with the desire to keep this place a beautiful place and protect farm and forest lands. That's one of the things that under under Oregon's land use laws we're charged with, trying to bring some of that balance as we develop out our regions. About 30 years ago, in rooms just like this with people just like you, Oregonians in this region planned for our future, and we developed long-term plans for how we wanted to grow. Looked at transportation, looked at housing, looked at job growth, looked at natural areas, clean water, clean air, et cetera. On your right, you see one scenario, which is let's have some really significant expansion of the growth boundary and let's grow out. In the middle, it was let's keep it tight. Let's have a really tight urban growth boundary, grow in our centers and our corridors in existing areas. And then a sort of middle option of let's see some moderate levels of urban growth boundary expansion with also a focus on centers and corridors in the region. And folks chose that sort of moderate option at the time and said, let's balance growth in our centers and our corridors with a series of expansions to the urban growth boundary that are planned out over time. Interestingly, in that last slide, you'll note 22,000 acres was sort of what was envisioned for a moderate amount of urban growth boundary expansion. Metro's actually expanded the boundary since 1979 by 33,000 acres, so well above that sort of notion of what might be moderate at the time. So this is the 2040 growth concept. This is the outgrowth of that planning process back in the 1990s, developed in the early 2000s. We added to it, desired outcomes for the region around the economy, livable communities, transportation systems, et cetera. You see it's a map you may not be familiar with in your day-to-day life as a map, but we all experience this place every day. We live in and around these centers and corridors, which the centers are in pink or purple for the key regional centers. Those are places that the region has planned to grow up, to see increased density. I was surprised the earlier panelists didn't answer the core question for this session today. I think everyone's talking about trying to get more density in the region as opposed to sprawl or homelessness. But that has been the plan for the region, is trying to grow up as much as we can in these centers and corridors. The centers are the yellow lines, so highways, transit routes. And then the blue areas are areas mostly recently added to the urban growth boundary that are intended for industrial uses, employment uses in the region. The brown areas, you heard Stafford earlier, those are urban reserves, so places that we have identified for potential growth of the urban growth boundary, places we look to cities to help plan to accommodate growth. And the green areas surrounding the entire area are rural reserves, which have been designated for protection from urbanization over the next about 38 years, a 50-year process. So that was intended to get to some of what Preston was talking about, giving some certainty about the places we might grow and the places that we would choose not to grow into. And largely that plan has been borne out in, this is a little bit dated data, and we'll get more updated data in this upcoming urban growth process of research, but those spikes that are coming up, they're supposed to come up off the page, show permits, where permits have been pulled for housing. So you see, Villebois in Wilsonville, you see Happy Valley, mentioned earlier, growing gangbusters. You see North Bethany, and you see the platform out on the Mac Station in Hillsborough, Renko Station, those areas, and of course downtown Portland. Also important to mention Vancouver. We include that in our planning process. They're not within Metro, they're not obviously within the state, but they're a part of what we think about in terms of the overall housing market in the larger area. So the vision of this 2040 growth concept is really largely being borne out all across the region. We agree, we're forecasting about 200,000 homes needed in the next 20 years. By my math, that was about 10,000 units per year over 20 years. But the challenge has been to get those produced. The Great Recession really slowed the housing market down back in 2008, 2009, and the housing bubble, of course, slowed things down as well. About 2/3 of the housing inside the UGB is single-family housing. We expect that to stay about the same, even though we're going to see, you saw some increasing rates of multifamily development. About 2/3 of households in the region consist of 1 or 2 people, and we forecast that to remain the same. So that sort of determines household size and the types of homes, apartments that folks demand. And like most of the US, deaths are starting to outpace births in our region. So population growth will mostly come from in-migration. We do expect that to be somewhat consistent. If it slows a little bit, we do expect a continued pace of growth. And the point of all this planning process has been to figure out how we accommodate that growth, not to just try to stop it or, put up walls. I love this slide. So this shows commuting patterns in the region. I think the main point, my main takeaway is that we're all connected in this. We have, very special places with, different ways, different approaches. But folks, no matter where they live, no matter how much we've tried to get jobs closer to where people live, people commute all over the region. And it's not just within the metro region. It's from Vancouver. It's from Marion County. People are going to where jobs are, and they're choosing where they live for a variety of different reasons. So if we've learned anything in the past decades of work on urban growth, it's that just having the land doesn't get you development. That the infrastructure, the ability to govern that land, the ability to annex that land was a big issue here in Oregon City, I know, with past expansions. Having all the pieces in place to develop land is incredibly important to getting the kind of communities that we desire, as opposed to having land that's inside the boundary, but it doesn't have any development on it. This is also very true for employment, in particular industrial land, because of the delta between the return on investment for creating industrial land compared to housing is vastly different. So the experience, these show different time tranches of UGB expansions. So the late 1990s, the early aughts, and more recently. The gray bar shows the expectations that we had as a region for units to be produced, and the blue as actual units produced. So you can see the urban growth boundary expansions that we've made historically have not produced the level of housing that we had all hoped for. And again, it's infrastructure, it's governance. I mean, Damascus is one point in that middle bar, but the other examples are all over our region. So it's not, you can't just say Damascus is the reason that these numbers are so different. That is why we have focused so strongly on city readiness, on working with cities to identify ahead of time how to plan areas to be brought into the UGB, so we understand their plans to govern it, their plans to address the infrastructure challenges, their work in their city to work with locals and prepare for things like increased traffic, new schools, parks, et cetera. Having all that conversation ahead of considering UGB expansions has been much more successful in more recent UGB decision-making processes. So you've heard a little bit about the antiquated land use system. I would say we've evolved it dramatically over the years. This top bar, we used to do a mathematical exercise to figure out how many units, how much land, do we need more land? We'd go find land. We were directed to find lands that had bad soil, so not farmland, not forest land. That's the kind of policy that led us to significant expansions in areas like Damascus, as opposed to looking on the west side. It was not legal for us to make expansions, for example, in South Hillsborough, which has houses on it today as a result of a follow-on UGB expansion. So we got together with our local partners. We went down to Salem and said, we need a new process, and we asked for the authority to establish urban and rural reserves and set aside some of the soil type analysis, set aside some of the process that was involved in trying to make UGB expansions. And that has allowed us to make a series of urban growth boundary expansions into identified urban reserves, notwithstanding some of the soil considerations. So areas where communities were ready for growth, they could identify the infrastructure needed, they could work with developers to get that land developed. So that was one process. We also, Wilsonville tried to come forward with an expansion back in 2015, and we couldn't find a need to justify that expansion. We had put a task force together back when I was the chief of staff for our then council president, Tom Hughes, developed legislation. We went down together with home builders, with our local government partners, and we created what we call the mid-cycle process to consider urban growth boundary expansions in between the every 6-year process of evaluating the need for land. So we could have a more nimble process to lean into. And then, although I know not everyone in the room supports this process, we've added another tool to our toolbox, which is urban growth boundary exchanges. So the idea of looking at lands that aren't producing the kind of housing that we expected, that don't seem to be in the next 10, 20, 30 years ready to develop, removing those from the urban growth boundary and adding in lands that where there's a plan, a local government with the pieces in place to get that land developed. So we have evolved the system dramatically over time to try to respond to needs. We also provide, we have a very small construction excise tax, and we've provided about almost $4 million in what we call 2040 development and planning grants to cities and the county here in Clackamas for a variety of different purposes. For Wilsonville, for example, some of that was to support concept planning for an expansion that they got in 2018 that they planned for, and then comprehensive planning to follow on. Most of the other cities are for planning inside the boundary. So the kind of things you heard, like the urban renewal proposal here in Oregon City, those are the kind of things that cities could apply for resources from this pot of funding. We actually, I will note to the point Preston made, we put out an offering this fall of $1 million to local governments, cities, to consider concept planning for urban growth boundary expansions in this upcoming cycle. Nobody applied for any of that money to plan for urban growth boundary expansions. Sherwood is in the process of planning for a UGB expansion, both for industrial land and for housing. They have some resources from a previous grant cycle. So concerning the lack of interest in cities to continue thinking about growing out. But the next few slides talk about the kind of things that cities are doing to grow inside the existing boundary. This is Happy Valley. Working now to annex with willing landowners into areas to the east of Happy Valley, the west side of what was the city of Damascus, and produce housing now on those lands. You heard earlier about the Metro Affordable Housing Bond. This is Las Flores, a 171 unit development for low-income and family-size low-income residents. This is, I think, up towards the community college, I believe. Metro has a transit-oriented development program, so this is using federal funds that we get from the Federal Transit Agency to develop more dense or more affordable units close to transit stations and frequent bus lines. We have to prove with those that we're going to generate additional rides on transit, so that's why it's a transit-oriented development. But we've developed over 6,200 units of housing in the last 10 years or so using these resources. And all around the region, but focused on areas that have high-frequency transit. A separate discussion for another day that I know commissioners here in particular are very interested in pursuing how to get more high-frequency transit and regular service to this part of our region. And then places like Wilsonville that are looking at long-term visions of how to grow up, how to achieve infill redevelopment. This is the town center loop in the middle of Wilsonville. You can see on the left it's got a defunct Fry's shopping center with acres of parking. This is all about getting housing, office, and trying to really bring more of a sense of a main street to Wilsonville. So exciting visions for how communities can grow over time. And then on the industrial front, this is an area that was added by Metro to the urban growth boundary back in the early 2000s. This is a relatively recent picture. It really took the city of Wilsonville putting money into road, 95th Avenue, using local improvement district, tools like urban renewal, other financing tools to achieve siting businesses in Wilsonville and attracting manufacturing and other companies to the city. So just to underscore the importance, how important it is for us to find those resources for investment in land readiness. It's been a theme of ours with the legislature. We've helped get legislation passed to enact the Oregon Industrial Land Program. We've not succeeded in getting funding for that program, so it sits there without resources. We've gotten $5 million or so in the last few years for brownfield cleanup, but just a very strong focus on getting the resources to actually activate the lands that are already in the urban growth boundary and support those places where we'll consider expanding the boundary. With that, there's my contact information if you would like to follow up afterwards. Otherwise, I think we're heading up here to do the Q&A.
Okay, well, I realize that we've got just a short period of time, so we're going to move quick, and I'm going to ask that your answers be as succinct as possible to these questions. And I'm just going to go through these. I've seen some, but do studies indicate our region with its wildfire and earthquake risk is attractive to climate refugees? Do planners care? So it sounds like because of wildfires and earthquake risks elsewhere, people want to move here. Do planners care? I'm not sure.
Oh, planners definitely care. This is the kind of thing that planners think about. We have actually looked hard at the question of climate refugees. We've been talking about this for 15 years now. I mean, ever since I've been at Metro. We are not seeing strong evidence for people moving for those reasons. And it, maybe our own recent wildfires, don't make us look like such a great place to come from a climate point of view.
Okay. How much, Preston, you have mentioned annual income to afford a certain price. How much annual income is needed for a family to afford any kind of housing? What percent of population cannot afford housing? And is that percent increasing?
Yeah, so it depends on where you live. But if we take a look at let's say city of Portland, because they usually tend to attract most of the data, I'd say 100% AMI. That's basically people who make the average amount for a family of four is 96,000 right now. And the average price for proper city of Portland home right now is about 550. That doesn't make it necessarily tenable for them to spend 30% of their income on housing. It more likely means that that average family of 100% AMI is going to be spending 40 to 50% of their income, even on a traditional, 3-bed, 2-bath house. So it depends, but for the most part, even 100% AMI is falling out of reach for a lot of folks.
Okay. Tootie, a question for you. Is the county receiving money from the homeless tax that Metro implemented last year?
Yes, supported housing services. I believe we've received 29 million so far on that. I could be off on that. It goes for 10 years. We receive monthly installments.
Okay. Preston, another one for you. What about building sufficient market rentals for low and middle income, not subsidized or luxury housing on either end of that middle?
What's the question there? Why not build more?
Needs to be eased to get up to the levels we need in the middle income, in middle housing.
Right, middle housing. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done, but basically it's make the process easier to build and make the regulations that particularly would have a bigger impact for starter homes. Those are things like tree removal fees, where it costs $30,000 just to remove a Douglas fir at a property. Or, SDC that impact obviously the starter home, the $450,000 homes, a lot more. There are property tax exemption programs. The Holte is one that the Multnomah County, City of Portland operate. It's relatively inexpensive, but it does help provide some reverse down payment assistance program for folks earning 100% AMI or less, or for builders that build $450,000 house.
Okay. For you, Bill, will the bill that you mentioned in, yeah, sorry, Dave, I'm sorry. I said Bill, well, Bill, will the bill, Dave, this is for you, you mentioned, will that allow overriding Metro or any of this?
Well, the bill we're talking about, the governor's bill won't apply to Metro because Metro is, you don't submit applications to Metro. Applications, the actual quasi judicial applications are submitted at the local government level at the city. And so that's where that bill will apply.
Okay. Chair Smith, is the former Quality Inn now off the tax rolls? And what is the county doing for housing beyond affordable housing?
We will close on the Quality Inn in 45 days, at which time it becomes government owned, and yes, it goes off the tax rolls. We have many projects in the pipeline. Like I said, the development of these projects are dependent on the availability of land and can we site those on unincorporated Clackamas County. In the past, the Board of County Commissioners has developed the Veterans Village, which is individual pod housing with a central service center where you can have your meals, laundry and showers and so forth. We have some land next to that particular facility, which we could be developed. And we're just looking at all kinds of things. But I want to say something about homelessness while I have the microphone. I do think government policies have aided in homelessness. And I think when we identify those, we need to try to correct those and move forward.
Very good. Okay. Would you comment on what if the urban growth expansion, once defined by Metro, was put in place, it would be automatically entered into the nearest city? In other words, you wouldn't have to annex, it'd be in, it's already for.
So many of our cities pursue willing annexation, and they identify, which tells you you've got a landowner that's interested in having their property developed. I know we had quite a challenge here in Oregon City after expansions in the late 90s and early 2000s with voter approved annexations being turned down. We and others worked together to figure out how to get legislation that said in uncertain circumstances that a local charter provision that says voters could vote on annexation would not apply. If you've taken certain steps, you've got landowners that are willing to annex in. So we've tried to find some routes to address that problem. You know, there's a lot of local pride in cities and to manage that process on their own. So I don't know how popular that would be with our city partners.
Right, right.
It
Under
wasn't
the,
popular at the Capitol, by the way.
go ahead.
That bill was not popular at the Capitol.
Yeah.
We were in the position of asking legislators to tell cities that to tell voters in the cities that there are some times when they don't get to choose to vote on annexation applications, which for a politician is a hard vote to take.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at all the numbers, Clackamas County has to, in the countywide, not just Clackamas County, but the whole county, I think, build 296 units a month in order to meet the percent of building. Does anyone know what the number is now in our county that we build? I don't. Okay, so we're getting close to closing. I have one final, maybe one. How much time we got? Stop this. 5 minutes. So this is for each of you. Choose one thing that you think would move the needle to meet the governor's goal of increased housing. What would it be? You can start, just go down the table.
I might be taking someone else's, but I think addressing the system development charge issue in some fashion. We need those resources to fund the infrastructure. This is road, SDC's system development charges are for roads, parks, sewer, water. They're $52,000 on a home right now in South Hillsborough. So figuring out how to average that out over some period of time. California has Melrose fees. Washington State uses real estate transfer taxes. There are other methods to get the resources needed to fund that infrastructure without putting it on the initial cost of the home.
I would say that depends on the region of the state you're in, but around here, the number one thing I hear is process. We need to make it easier from the time that you submit the application. You need the applicant needs a certain process that's quick and that doesn't lead to the potential for multiple appeals. Time is money. The longer it takes for us and the less certainty it takes for us to get approvals, the less likely it is that we're going to be able to deliver product.
So I want to, Dave, you keep the microphones. I want to drill down on that a bit because I do agree with you. So is that a legislative fix that sets timeframes?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. It's yes in part because some of the requirements that are the burdens on time are mandated by statute. So only the legislature can fix those. So yes, it's a partial statutory change. And I also think, frankly, that it has to come from the state, either through the agency or through the legislature, because the problem cities, which I won't name, but we all know that there are some, including some in the region, the problem cities are not going to fix themselves. So the state has to come in and do it.
Yep. Thank you. Okay.
Well, you took my first and second. So I think my third would be developing a workforce that is suitable to help develop the housing that we need. And that it starts with, high school, community college, getting more people into the trades is going to be essential if we're to reach that 36,000 unit target over any amount of years.
I believe the governor said she wanted to expand 36,000 units per year inside the urban growth boundary. Is that what you're referring to, Dan?
So, yeah.
That's not possible. It's not going to happen. There is not the availability of land. You take a look at House Bill 2001 that our board worked on, the middle housing. You talk about doing things the Clackamas County way. Oh no, we're stacked on top of each other to the point where you can't even have a car. there's no place to park a car because on middle housing, the density is so tight on top of each other. You can't have sidewalks and you can't park on the street. So some of these implementations that she wants to put forth, she may have been a legislator, but she was never a commissioner in any of the counties across Oregon that had to implement some of the programs they passed. Secondly, you need to expand the available land use. I disagree with one of the panelists that says keep inside the urban growth boundary. America does not have a regional metro that governs the most populous counties in their state. And I think that is a huge problem. And then thirdly, transportation routes. How are people going to get to work? How are they going to get to the doctor? How are they going to get to the grocery store? We do not see a single new freeway or highway built in this state in the last 35 years, and the population has doubled. So we're not addressing the key infrastructure problems that keeps us from attaining the affordable housing that we so desperately need.
You know, we've all heard the term drive for price. You know, there's people that still want that American dream, that want the house, want the yard. That's why Malala, some of our rural counties, you look at the fastest growing cities in the state, there's a reason they're fastest growing. People still want them. So anyway, a little editorial. Okay, I think we're about ready to stop. Okay, I get the high sign. So I want to thank our panelists, Hootie, Preston, Dave, and thank you very much. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to put a little teaser out here. Next month, we are going to have our forum is going to be on the economic drivers in our area, which will be talking more about the Abernathy Green project that Seth alluded to a little bit earlier. And we'll talk also about Tumwater Village at the Falls and maybe a few other things that are going on in town. So should be a very interesting meeting. And then in April, we're going to have navigating solutions to solving homelessness together. So there's some key things that are coming up in April that will be brought forward at that meeting. So I think that's everything I was supposed to do. All right. Thank you all for coming. Have a great afternoon.